He went to work every day. He read his Bible during lunch breaks. And for nearly 20 years, he was one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. This is the story of how the Green River Killer hid in plain sight and why the women he targeted were overlooked for far too long. And before we talk about him, we need to talk about the women. Before task forces, before forensic databases, before headlines and courtrooms, there were women with morning routines, a favorite meal, a bus they needed to catch, someone who expected them home. This story does not begin with the killer. It begins with them. In the early 1980s, Pacific Highway South stretched through King County, Washington, a corridor of bus stops, motels, diners, and shifting neon light. It connected communities living at the economic margins of a rapidly expanding Seattle. You can almost hear it, trucks downshifting before dawn, the low hum of traffic, a radio weather report predicting rain. On a nightstand, a pair of earrings beside a wallet. Inside that wallet, a photograph folded soft from being handled too often. In a jacket pocket, a handwritten bus schedule. These are not crime scene objects. They are artifacts of ordinary life. The women who disappeared along this corridor were daughters, sisters, mothers, friends. Some were teenagers, some were in their 20s. Many were navigating homelessness, addiction, unstable housing, or survival sex work. Those realities shaped their vulnerability, but they did not define their humanity. A sister remembered laughter that filled a room. A mother remembered braiding hair before school. A friend remembered shared plans to leave town and start over somewhere warm. Recognition comes first. Then something small. A missed phone call. A shift at work left uncovered. A door that stays locked when it should have opened. At first, it feels temporary. Then it stretches. By 1982, bodies were being discovered near the Green River and in wooded areas across southern King County. Patterns began to emerge. Women vanishing along Pacific Highway South. Similar circumstances. Similar methods. Law enforcement recognized the likelihood of a serial offender. That same year, the Green River Task Force was formed, at the time one of the largest serial killer investigations in U.S. history. Dozens of detectives, thousands of tips, evidence cataloged by hand. The response was significant. And yet, families and community advocates argued it was not enough. They described a gap between the urgency they felt the immediate absence of someone they loved and the pace of institutional response. Resource constraints complicated coordination. Jurisdictional boundaries slowed information flow. The sheer volume of cases strained personnel and budgets. But critics also pointed to something more uncomfortable. Many of the victims were young women involved in street-based sex work. Some had prior arrests. Some struggled publicly with addiction. In the social climate of the early 1980s, that shaped perception. It influenced which disappearances led newscasts, which ones were framed as high risk, which ones were quietly assumed to be temporary. The question is not whether investigators cared. Many worked tirelessly. The question is how systems struggled to prioritize lives already considered peripheral. If stories like this matter to you, stories that center the people behind the headlines, consider subscribing, not for sensationalism, but for remembrance. While detectives mapped dump sites and assembled timelines, families searched in their own ways. They called hospitals. They called friends. They walked stretches of highway themselves. The killings continued. Looking back, the geography feels visible. Clusters near accessible roadways, wooded areas offering concealment, victims last seen in the same commercial corridor. In retrospect, the pattern seems clear, but in real time, it was obscured by incomplete information and limited forensic capability, and by a suspect who blended in. His name was Gary Ridgway. For more than 30 years, he worked as a truck painter at Kenworth in Renton, Washington. He punched a time clock. He collected paychecks. He married 3 times. He attended church services. Co-workers described him as quiet, sometimes awkward, not extraordinary. There was no cinematic double life. There was routine. There was concealment. Court records later established that Ridgway targeted women he met along Pacific Highway South. He offered rides, he brought them to secluded areas, he strangled them manually. He left their bodies in wooded locations, often returning to some sites. He later told investigators he believed sex workers would not be reported missing quickly. That calculation reflected not only his thinking, but the social conditions he believed would protect him. By 1987, investigators had already interviewed him. He was a person of interest. They obtained saliva and hair samples. He passed a polygraph examination. At the time, DNA testing technology was still developing. The biological evidence was stored. What investigators didn't realize yet was that they had already spoken to him. And then, for years, the case stalled. Not abandoned, but suspended in uncertainty. The task force remained active. Detectives continued reviewing tips. Families continued waiting. Time moved forward. Answers did not. In 2001, advances in STR DNA analysis changed everything. Biological evidence preserved from the 1980s was retested using far more precise methods, and the evidence that would eventually convict him had been sitting in storage for years. The DNA matched multiple victims. After nearly 2 decades, science closed a gap that manpower alone could not. Gary Ridgway was arrested in November 2001. For families, the arrest was not triumph. It was the reopening of a wound that had never healed. In 2003, Ridgway entered guilty pleas to 48 counts of aggravated first-degree murder in King County Superior Court. In exchange for full cooperation, including identifying additional victims and dump sites, prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty. This decision divided families. Some believed execution was the only proportional response. Others believed information, names, locations, confirmation mattered more than retribution. The plea agreement required detailed confessions. Families would soon hear details that had never been made public. He described locations, methods, decisions. Some remains were recovered because of this cooperation. For some families, that meant burial instead of uncertainty. For others, it meant hearing facts no one ever wants to know. During sentencing, family members addressed him directly. They spoke about missed birthdays, about empty chairs at holidays, about children growing up without mothers. Their words were steady, controlled, devastating. Ridgway received 48 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. A later conviction brought the confirmed total to 49 victims, though investigators believe the number may be higher. Life imprisonment is permanent. Absence is also permanent. Convictions did not restore what was lost. Some families still do not have full certainty about final moments. Some remains were never recovered. Justice in cases like this is partial by definition. And yet, something changed. The Green River investigation influenced how law enforcement approaches serial crimes involving marginalized victims. DNA databases expanded nationally. Missing persons protocols evolved. Cold case units gained traction. There was growing recognition that vulnerability should not equate to invisibility. These changes were pushed by families, by advocates, by journalists who refused to let the story fade. The conditions that shaped this case, poverty, addiction, marginalization, did not disappear when the sentences were handed down. They remain present. That is why this story continues to matter, not because of the killer, but because of what it revealed about systems, about science, and about whose lives receive urgency. We began with earrings on a nightstand, a bus schedule folded carefully in half, a photograph carried close to the body. Now we know whose they were. The measure of this story is not how many victims were counted. It is whether we remember that each number was a person, say their names, not their case numbers, and understand that the world this happened in is not distant history. It is connected to the present in how institutions respond, in how communities advocate, in how easily some lives are still overlooked. If there is a lesson here, it is not fear, it is vigilance, not fascination with harm, but commitment to dignity, because these women were not footnotes in someone else's story. They were the story, and they still are.